This episode is brought to you by The Venture Project. The Venture Project is a business incubator and co-working space located in Oshkosh, Wisconsin at 210 North Main Street, Oshkosh, Wisconsin. You don't have to be local if you want to get involved. You can always go to my website, aaronjarmstrong.com, to figure out how we can get a free consultation to book with you if you're interested in starting a business, you're interested in finding a side hustle, you're wanting to turn your passion into something monetary. Let's figure out a way to do that. I do free consultations up to 30 minutes, and we can figure out how we can get your business off the ground. If you are local to the Oshkosh, Wisconsin area, stop on by, set up an appointment at aaronjarmstrong.com/schedule. Otherwise, to learn more about what we have going on at the Venture Project, you can go to theventureprojectoshkosh.com. Today's guest was Alec Watson. Alec is best known for his advertising work, and he's a multidisciplinary digital media artist. As a photographer, his work has graced magazine covers, movie posters, album covers, and a multitude of advertising from Coca-Cola and Starbucks to heads of state. As director of photography, Alec has filmed ad work for companies like Starbucks, Britney Spears, Goldwell, KMS, Microsoft, Sexy Hair, music videos, and several award-winning short films. A triple threat in digital media, Alec started as a recording engineer, earned platinum and gold records for record production, songwriting, keyboard, and backing vocals. Alec was also nominated for an LEO for film composition. Alec makes home Vancouver Island with his wife Sarah, two amazing children, and two dogs, Abby and Arlo. Still traveling for campaign shoots, Alec's favorite client is Healthy Role Models, Sarah's health and fitness company. The couple produces Sarah's projects out of a film studio on their property. Alec recently completed his master's degree in digital media design at Harvard. Alec teaches visual branding and shares insights that elevate the success of businesses at yourvisualbrand.com. Folks, you are going to really enjoy our conversation today. We talk about all those things that you struggle with as digital marketers, trying to compete in a noisy environment, how to find stop scroll, how to not get caught in what we call the gear trap, buying too good of equipment for the story that you're about to tell, and his process of how that works, as well as learning some really cool insights and tactics in the creative arts industry, trying to find, really, this is a master class in digital marketing by anyone more qualified than Alec himself. So folks, without any further ado, welcome to the show.
Welcome to Winners, Wallets, and Worldviews, the only show that's going to teach you
how to be somebody.
Where in your life did you learn that you're not good enough?
Take what you're most passionate about and what you're most fearful of, and what is the plan to overcome that fear, and what is the plan to enact that passion.
Perfect. Joining me from Vancouver Island, we have Alec Watson, a visual artist and a brand strategist that's going to share with us a little bit of his story and a really incredible takeaways you guys can use to start to build your digital presence as well online. Alec, thank you so much for jumping on the show today.
Thank you. I am excited to talk to somebody. We don't get to get out much anymore, especially like living on an island now. I'm usually kind of an international traveler, and that changed a lot in the last year.
What do you think? Being a traveler, what's like kind of one of the coolest places you've gone to?
Oh man, coolest places. Well, probably Cambodia was like one of the biggest surprises I ever had. And I wasn't actually even there for like a formal photo shoot. My wife has a company that does, and part of her business is philanthropy. And so I kind of went as a tag along to capture some of the philanthropy stuff. And I didn't know Cambodia other than, the movies, and I'm not talking like Tomb Raider,
right.
The much deeper, more tragic movies. And so that was my view of Cambodia, and going there, and then seeing the ancient history of Cambodia, and having no idea of this ancient history and where these civilizations and cultures came from. I was like, wow.
Right.
I was mind blown. And then suddenly I did actually get to go to see where Tomb Raider started. And it was just like, I didn't even know that was a real place. I'm embarrassed to say I had no idea that was a real place. I thought it was a set.
That's just like, I don't know if it's the same way with you, but whenever I travel somewhere, it activates like a different part of your mind and soul, and it just you get a lot more creative ideas, you get different juices flowing, and you only know the superficial, like really touristy things in most
Yeah,
places you go to because of Hollywood or whatever. But when you actually go there, you start to learn a lot of cool stuff. Like Venice, Italy was actually one of the first Jewish ghettos back in the 1500s. Who would ever think that about Venice, Italy? You just think it's like the James Bond movies where people are running around in speedboats or whatever. But there's so
absolutely.
much history and cool stuff that goes on in a lot of these different areas. So I'm always excited to find out, where you're traveling, because Cambodia, right, from Hollywood, you just think that was Vietnam, and that's about all that happened in the War of Vietnam, right?
Uh,
Or
exactly.
the
Yeah. Like, yeah, totally. All related through there. And so that was my vision going in. And wow, did that change? And seeing like the cultural hub of the world from 1,000 years ago. And it's just like, how come I never learned about that? Like, I knew about Egypt.
yeah.
And then we kind of skipped over that to the Renaissance. And there was this other part of the world that was thriving in between those two times. And it was amazing.
There's just
And
so much, because
to
I
see
mean
those temples.
the bandwidth of what you get in school or in Hollywood is just, it has to be spread so thin because you only have so much time to spend in school. But when you travel around the world, it's really, when you say the word to be cultured, it really, what it's doing is just like accessing a whole new part of you. You're just learning something so new. So the people that are content living in their little bubble or whatever, I just challenge you, get out there if you can, and check stuff out, step out of your comfort zone and just go places.
Absolutely. I'm fortunate to have been pretty much a traveler all my life. I was an exchange student as a kid and went on an exchange to New Zealand. So I'm going to go into
Jealous. Yeah.
and I ended up having a girlfriend there who at the time was a kind of a famous singer. So kind of like New Zealand, Australia's version of Debbie Gibson.
Sure.
I'm dating myself here. I don't know. Audience wise, are just like, yeah, who's Debbie Gibson? um,
Selena
so
Gomez, Justin Bieber. I'm
yeah,
I'm bad with music too. I'm a
exactly.
classic rock guy. The blues.
There you go. Yeah, Selena Gomez of the '80s. But the New Zealand Australia version, and that was my girlfriend. And to impress her, I learned to play piano, and I learned one song. And at the time, it was kind of like when you learn to type and you kind of
Yep.
do it like one finger, and then
Just memorize.
you kind of get your fingers working. And once that muscle memory worked, I memorized one song that I could play. And so every opportunity, she would show off her new boyfriend who could play piano, and I would play my one song,
That's
which worked really great until I had to jam with the band. And it was like, so do you guys know this song?
this is the only one
Uh,
I do. Sorry.
yes, exactly. And then hop off stage as fast as you can. Anyway, that was how I ended up in music for the first part of my life. It was completely by accident, but got to tour the world as a musician, and like we had some hit songs and stuff. And
So music was
so
really the first kind of creative art that you started to partake in, you would say?
absolutely, I was going to be a veterinarian
Okay.
growing up. Science and math were my subjects in school, and I loved math for being able to, when you got the right answer
Right.
in
And
math.
it's working, right?
That's right. Yeah.
It's
And
just clicking.
there's something about that I love. Then all of a sudden this art thing came along. It was completely unexpected. So I was like a teenager, learned to play piano. I was kind of in a band and going around. There were, was hits and stuff. At the end of my exchange, I moved back to Canada, or didn't move, came back to Canada, and convinced my then girlfriend to come up north from New Zealand, and we got signed to a record deal. And so then I like really had to learn how to be a musician, and so I went from sciences to being an artist pretty much by fluke. And that was the thing that I loved about the change was no longer could I know for sure that I had the right answer, but there was something that felt great in my heart.
Mm.
And that was a complete shift. And I wasn't even aware at the time that I was lacking somewhere in growth in that area.
Yeah. There's something about music, especially, I think, that great musicians or good songwriters, especially, and I think this works in a lot of forms of art, actually apply a very scientific mathematic lens to what they're doing. They can break things apart. They can see what works and what doesn't work. I mean, if you think of the build of a song, it becomes almost a formula in a lot of ways, but then there's boundaries within it that allow for innovation. And it's more scientific, I think, than not, because everybody knows the kind of the starving musician that gets so creative and eccentric with their style that it doesn't resonate with people. It doesn't connect. There's a
Yeah.
scientific method, I think, that really like makes it systematic, that works every time, like the 4-chord song, right?
Yes. Oh no, yeah, absolutely. I am 100% with you. And so I'm, a photographer and filmmaker these days. And I see that in both because both are very similar to what you're saying. I definitely fell into the camp of being very structured, and probably that science math side of the brain.
Right.
I'm not even sure I believe in sides of the brain in that way, because it's just not how would I know? It's not my experience. I just go by that. That's somebody's model, and that seems to work. There seems to be a left side and a right side, and maybe there's hemispheres that are in charge. I don't know, but when I was in music. So by my early 20s, we had a hit record. It was like a gold record in Canada. Moved to Nashville, and I thought I had it all worked out because, like you said, I knew the formula. And so I didn't come from that art family and have art growing up. I came from science and math, and I would look at the structure and how that song was built, and I would build a song exactly like that.
Yep.
And I was very formulaic in my approach. And I mean that worked great up until the time when it didn't work great. and, and then I had no answer. And I've got to say that I don't know how you find balance in those two. I was unable to find balance in music. So kind of what you said, that starving musician person, that person that doesn't resonate with other people. As a record producer, I've got a little wall of gold records, and I managed to double platinum. And for me, I was never ever the best musician in the room, like not even close. The only thing that I had going for me, like in my mind at least, was communication. And I'd spent enough time learning everybody's instrument enough so that I could communicate in their
Mhm.
language. But I was also very simple in my
Yeah.
approach. Like I was a listener. And if it could be simple so that I could understand it, that's probably what seemed to work. Whereas like when I hang around with, like, I would call musicians, man, I'm a fish out of water. They're talking about things that I don't really
Yes.
get. Um, I did do a bachelor's degree in jazz at one point in my life, and I approached it scientifically,
Yeah.
and I've got a feel for it. But there were guys who didn't approach that scientifically, and the complexity came out of them musically, and it was just like, that is an amazing thing to see, and I don't have it.
Yeah. You mentioned something that I think most, and I'll just generalize this to like great
Sure.
people, really people that I think that find a lot of success, especially in leadership or entrepreneurship. They're great at what you explained as being able to communicate with them on common ground and simplify it into a way that kind of can synchronize facts, right? I think the best engineers aren't necessarily the ones that sit there and code all day or get into the weeds, but the ones that can communicate a very complex, abstract thing with the right things to talk to the business people so the business people can make money. Same thing with music, is being able to communicate with these people that might be so into their instruments, but say, hey, can you do this and tweak this because this might resonate with a person better than what you're doing? And I think that's the case with any industry across the board, being able to simplify, summarize very complex things into something that works.
Yeah, simple, and it's a really easy word to say, and amazingly hard to get to. I luck in music. I'm gonna go ahead and say that I lucked out in just being simple, and there was absolutely I was in the right place at the right time. Probably never would have ended up in music. I probably would have, I'd have been a doctor of some sort and kind of a scientist, and missed out on a whole beauty in my life by not getting to travel that road. And
Mhm.
I'm so glad I did. And one of the things along the way was I always took photos. So even in music, I was always doing our cover art. I shot all the bands that I was in. I would always shoot the covers for it was, I was going to say records. I'm not that old. Well, actually, it would be you don't have to be old anymore. But I was in that in between time when it was cassettes and CDs.
Yeah,
And
right.
so I actually, when I say I have a gold record on the wall, I don't. I'm not going to fess up. There's a gold CD, but it's just no fun to say, you know. And there was that awful time. I don't actually have one, but a lot of my friends from music from that time, they've got gold cassettes.
Wow.
On the wall. And it's like, what a disappointment.
Yeah. How do they do it now? Do they just have little gold MP3 files out there or MP4?
Yeah, no, exactly. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, CDs still. And just like, does anybody listen to them? But that's how it. That's
most
how
places don't even give them in your car anymore.
I know. I haven't had one arrive in many, many years now, but I've got friends who still have them arrive, and it comes. I can say for sure it came as a CD on their wall. But it's just like if they're going to make something up, like make me a record. I want that big disc.
Well, like that's interesting because I run into like a lot of people, I think, in the trend, certainly in the entrepreneurship space, is like you gotta be an expert in one thing. And I'm starting, the more I reflect on that, it's more complex than that. I think there's a lot of value to the generalist, to the polymath. And you're a musician who's now taken a pattern of thinking and applied this in what used to be an audio way, a hearing, right? And now applying it into a visual way and applying it into other aspects of branding and marketing. Tell me, like, what is the process, the pattern that you think as an artist that allows you to move between genres of art, if you will, very fluidly?
Man, that is a super awesome and deep question all at the same time. There's two things that come to mind right away, and they fit into that hemispheres idea side of the brain. I'll start with music really quickly. When I started out in music, the first thing I did, I went to school to become a recording engineer.
Okay.
Turned out, I was really good at the engineering part of engineer.
Yeah.
There's two parts to being a recording engineer. So the recording engineer is the guy who sits in front of the board with the mixing console with all those knobs, like probably more knobs in a big studio than on a 747. I don't know for sure, but I'm guessing that that's true. And the one thing that you got to do when you look at those gigantic boards is kind of know how the electricity runs through it, because that's what we're doing. The electricity comes from the microphone, and if you know the order that it goes through, you can get it to come out in a very clean way. If you don't know, you're going to get distortion, bad sounds, all of those things. So I spent a lot of time learning signal flow and how it runs through the board. And I probably know it for all sorts of those amazing analog boards. What I was really bad at the time was actually listening to the music.
Yeah.
And so I would be this fantastic engineer of noise floor and cleanness, but I was not listening to the music properly. And it took me years to become a good engineer that was listening to the music first and the engineering second. And I am bringing this up because I see this happen a lot with cameras. So here's me on a podcast picking up my iPhone I'll just hold it close to the microphone so that can be seen. We have two very different groups of people taking photos, and they're super valid. One of our groups is our professional photographers, and they've got the big camera. They're taking the photos for our brands. Then as a brand, we kind of, especially when we're smaller brands, it's usually on us in some way to be taking images for social media, or even, choosing them. Everybody needs a social media presence, and we're going to use the phone to do that. One of the beautiful things about the phone is that there's an AI in there that's taking care of all sorts of stuff. It makes non-technical photographers really wonderful in just looking at an image and being able to photograph it.
Yep.
Then on the flip side, there's this whole broad range of photographers, some of them are engineers like I was, and they're worried about there's a thing in photography called bokeh or bokeh. It's the blurriness in the background. And you'd be amazed if you're a non-photographer when because everybody gets into their little niche. How many people who pick up big cameras are really concerned about the look of that blurriness? And you'll see threads in chat that go on and on about, oh, this lens is terrible because that bokeh just is too I don't know, whatever. And it's just like, you guys, you're not looking at the picture, you're not looking at the story.
Yeah.
On our other side, we've got everybody with their phone, and that's all they're following. It's just like, this is just my story, and they're missing the technical. Finally, me going back to your original question of how do you move between those, it's this balance between left brain and right brain. It's understanding that there's a story to tell, and there's a feeling that goes along with that story, and that's that art side. When I can see the story from an entrepreneur side about what they're attached to, how they're trying to make a difference in the world, the feelings that they're going to make for their audience, that's the story that everybody should have in their social media. I have to do it technically at the same time. The technical stuff allows me to do things like simplify.
Yeah.
It's very difficult with an iPhone to really technically simplify things. I can't control the light. I can control the depth of field a little. I don't have a lot of lens choices. When you can keep your eye on the prize of the story, how you want to be connected with your heart, and know how you're going to do that with your mind, and technically, when you put those two together, I think you can travel through all sorts of careers, because just about everything we do is made up of the two, and it's really hard to find that middle ground, because if we're left brain, right brain oriented, we're always stronger one side than the other.
Yeah. There's a lot, I think, that you packed into this story, this analogy that you kind of brought, because there's almost an art to finding what is good enough for what you're trying to do, right?
Yep.
It goes into anything. And me being, my background in systems engineering is, okay, we get it. You got to get 100 people across the country. You can do that by plane, train, automobile, right? So we got to figure out, what are we trying to do here? What's the cost? What's our scope? And you're starting to kind of craft, in your case, what you're referring to as the story. What are we trying to accomplish here, and what is the goal? And we're ruling out all the things that don't matter, so we can really focus in on the things that do matter. You see great filmmakers do this, right? With the way they shoot. They're going to do a close-up when they're trying to get you to focus in on a certain emotion of somebody, and they're going to pan out when they're trying to set context to what you're looking at, or where you are perhaps in the story. And I think that that's what you're kind of hitting on, is there's really an art, and I think that applies to business as well. I'll give you an example. When we put this studio together, we rent this studio out to other people as well. And we charge $50 an hour to come into the studio and record your stuff. So the big question is, how much do we spend on gear to put in our locker for people, right? So I talked to some of my buddies that are sound engineers and audio engineers and musicians and stuff, and they're saying, you got to get these $1,300 microphones to pull it all together. And I'm like, these are plumbers and electricians trying to talk about a podcast right now. Like, do they really want or need that? And how many podcasts am I going to have to sell $50 an hour before I even pay off one microphone? When I could get them an SM or a nice Shure 58 that's been around since the 1960s that the Rolling Stones recorded on, that sounds crisp and beautiful today, that's nobody's going to know unless you are a serious podcast junkie. But it's about the story, right? Like, we still record with some lighter equipment because we want to get out there and connect with people and get the story. And the quality of the story sometimes supersedes the content. Now, if you want that real crisp sound and you've got a huge following, whatever, gear becomes a whole new question. And this as an artist, the gear becomes a huge rabbit hole that I think a lot of photographers, videographers, and audio people go down, that just can be overkill if you're not really getting the kind of traction you need.
I am so on your team on that one. And I am so guilty of going down the rabbit hole so many times. I spent most of my life in that rabbit hole. And there was a time when absolutely the best camera made a difference. And so when I took up photography right at the start of digital. I think I had the very first digital camera ever, or at least the first affordable one. It was this Ricoh, and it it didn't actually have a screen that you could see.
Yeah.
You just kind of aimed it in the right direction, and it was a 720 by 1068, so not even a megapixel. And the only way you could see it was to plug it into your television, because it didn't have a data card either. And so you plugged it into your TV and you could see the pictures, and it was just like, there's the future of of photography.
Right.
Compared to a print, it's just like, yeah, probably not. Dynamic range, not so good. It's pretty blurry. And TVs, of course, they were tube televisions
Yeah.
at the time. So, that was a great equalizer as well. So it wasn't like you could see the pixels because the television was blurring it
Right.
all
Right.
over the place. A few years down the road, we started to get into DSLRs, and they made it to like 4 megapixels and 6 megapixels. And there was a time when I was just like, man, if I had one of those digital Hasselblads, for anybody that's not a photographer, that's a mid-format camera. And I think at the time it was $47,000 for the camera and a couple of lenses. And I bought one. That was a lot of money for somebody starting out in photography. That's nuts.
Yeah.
But it turned out that I actually paid for it in about 6 weeks, just from the jobs, from the people who believed that having this, what was then a 30 megapixel camera, was going to change everything. And those days are over. We do not need to go there anymore. Like, man, I carry my phone everywhere because the phone is good enough. There's this, you know what? You probably know this one better than me. So I'll toss it back to you. For me, I always think of an 80% rule.
Yes.
And
Yep.
it takes 80%, or it takes a certain amount of time to get 80% of the way there. Most people are pretty happy with about 85% quality.
Yeah.
And so if I can get there in this amount of time, to get that next little bit, I'm going to have to start doubling my time. And every increment you're doubling. So you're going up this really steep curve really fast. So trying to find your place on that curve of like good enough to
Yes.
be able to tell the story in a way that your audience is going to appreciate, it happens surprisingly early on.
Yeah. I think there's also, like, at least the way I think of it too, because we're wrestling with this as we try to generate content like every other person that's trying to build an online presence,
Yeah.
is I think when we had a speaking circuit set up in about 2019, and all the films that we did were almost like a wedding film, right? It was like really nicely produced, very cinematic and pretty and all this stuff, but it just took way too much time, and we were finding that the proportion of people watching it wasn't really that much. And in social media, it disappears within 24 hours, right? You were going to lose that video in the news feed so quickly that we switched strategies this year to way more. Let's get it out fast. Let's make it good enough. And let's see, what equipment do we have that we can use and leverage? What's going to do the biggest bang for our buck and stuff like that, instead of trying to like focus so much on making really nice cinematic pieces. Like, let's just get some snippets. Let's figure out what's going to be captivating enough right now.
Yeah. I again, totally with you. I mean, I make my living, or have made my living until I wasn't making a living at it suddenly when I couldn't travel, filming for big brands. And I can tell you for sure, there was a shoot in Malibu that I did. So the iPhone 11 had just come out. I had an iPhone 11 on me, and we're shooting in a big beach house in Malibu. It's a beauty shoot. I've got my film team there. We've got like the top of the line film cameras, like within reason. So probably like $30,000 a camera for
Wow.
filming,
Yeah.
and then my top of the line still cameras. And I grabbed my iPhone and for a behind the scenes shot, and I realize that the picture looks better than the $30,000 film camera, because the AI is looking at it going, oh, you're trying to film that person and that's a blue sky. So I'm just going to pull that blue sky down for you rather than overexpose it white. And I'll get the exposure right on that person's face because that's a face. And then I'm going to squash it into this level of dynamic range. And so, yeah, I was shocked. Like at the after processing, we could get a better picture. But if you're trying to get something out fast, like I couldn't touch it. Like the iPhone was kicking butt on the big cameras, apart from the fact that we didn't have a lens on there that could compete with
Yeah.
the good lenses. The what was going on with the processing and with that chip was superior on the iPhone to the big cameras.
Yeah.
And that was an eye opener. I was just like, oh, things are going to change.
Unbelievable, right? I mean, because now it's so accessible because everybody's got that. So now it really is a competition with the story. I mean, I remember. So I've always had a dream that we're trying to get into making high level film productions at some point, right? Like that's just always been a dream of mine. So years
Yeah.
ago, I met with a director who's a pretty well known Hollywood director. I told the story on the podcast, and he basically his advice was start with microfilms, make something, kind of get stuff out there, and start entering in film festivals, blah blah blah. And so I was like, okay. So I went onto YouTube and I was like, this was like back with iPhone, I think 6 or 7. I was like,
Yeah.
has anybody made a short film with just an
Yes.
iPhone
Yeah.
7? Right. And of
Yeah.
course, yeah, the tons of people. And one of them was awesome. I mean, I watched it was like a 16-minute short and it was some awesome action sequence, all filmed with an iPhone 7. And a lay person would probably not even realize that this
Never
was
know.
filmed
Yeah.
without professional cameras. It was unreal. Aside from the fact that you get some of those like nice cinematic artsy shots with some higher end cameras, it was crazy. And I was sitting there thinking, wow, I mean, someone could make this on a shoestring budget. This guy had made, several $100,000 off of this film, winning at festivals, whatever, and the entire thing on an iPhone 7. Unbelievable. And it just started to put it into perspective that like we're in an environment now where we're really competing on the story. So it becomes, that 80-20 principle. How do we tell that story?
Story number one, back to my music days. I used to be mystified as to how I could listen to something. Oh, I mean, let's go with the Beatles.
Sure.
The Beatles did not have the gear that I
Yeah.
had access to in the end of the 80s, early 90s when it came to audio, like not even close. Yet I didn't touch anything, even in my own mind that, thought I really had it going on in my, in my early 20s. Like I had it all figured out. I knew that I wasn't touching what they had done. And it was beautiful songs put together with, beautiful melodies
Yep.
and incredible production with the gear that they had. And you put great musicians in a room to work together. You're going to end up with something fantastic at the end of the day. And we're at that place now with visuals. If you can tell that story, it doesn't matter what piece of gear you're going to use. The story wins every time.
Yeah, I can't agree more. I mean, I'm a guitar player. My favorite guitar is Fender Stratocaster. Been around since 1954 for 57. So 54, and still to this day, number one guitar. The people most popular guitar for that crispy sound. Nobody can replicate it. And it goes back to like, okay, well, if the gear is now constant, let's say, for example, let's just assume the gear is constant now. Everybody's got iPhones. They all shoot 4K. They all have stabilizers within them. What's going to be that next evolution of storytelling? I mean, I've seen that. It seems to me, and I want to get your thoughts on this, but it seems to me like people that have figured out how to attention engineer things seem to be some of the best storytellers right now, or at least they can capture your attention long enough to trick Facebook and Instagram into thinking that you're a really good storyteller. But what's like your process for being able to tell that story for someone, as if they assuming gear is all the same?
Yeah. Gear being like surprisingly close to equal.
Sure.
especially when we get to the mid-priced gear now. Like I could struggle absolutely to tell the difference between a $6,000 video camera and a $200,000 video camera.
Yeah.
Like I could look at them on a good screen and absolutely not know. And like in tough conditions, because that's where the iPhone still can't compete. You give that a huge, what we call a big dynamic range. So like lots of shadow detail, like shadows where it needs some detail and brights. There's lots of digital compression things that go on, and you just need a big chip that can move data fast without compression to be able to pull that off. And that's just not going to happen, in miniature yet. But telling the story, there's some strategies for sure. And for me, visually, that changed 3 years ago now. I had a glaucoma attack. I don't know if you know what glaucoma actually is. I did not know what glaucoma really was when I had a glaucoma attack. So when you go into the optometrist, no, wrong one, ophthalmologist. It's just like, it's one of them, and I got it wrong.
They're all eye doctors.
You should, yeah. Somebody who's about to talk about eyes should know which eye doctor he went to. Sorry. Credibility on this story gone.
Yeah. So, we had an eye doctor on a couple months ago. So
okay. Yeah, the eye doctor, that guy.
Yeah.
So anyway, when they test your eyes a couple different ways, they blow a little puff of air into your eye. I don't know if you've had that test before.
Yeah.
And they tell you, oh, we're testing for glaucoma. I'd been going for years, and every time I went, the machine was broken. They would puff it in my eye, and I'm just like, oh man, the machine's down. Turned out the machine was never down. I had glaucoma, and it was so bad that the calibration for the machine just looked like it was wrong because I wasn't presenting symptoms of glaucoma. There's a couple of different types of glaucoma. I had a version that where I had closed angle glaucoma, and it can, if you think of like a sink, kitchen sink with a drain in it, and something blocks the drain, the pressure of that water stops the water from draining out of the sink.
Sure.
I had the same thing in my eye. And so I would complain of eyeball headaches all the time. And so I'd go to the doctor for eyeball headaches. It turned out it was glaucoma. This would get sealed. My eye would swell. I'd get a massive headache. And in general, that should make you go blind. Turned out I was one of the people that doesn't go blind. I just got terrible eye headaches when this would happen. So they put me in for laser surgery, and I had the laser surgery, but after they punched extra holes in my eyes, I couldn't see the same anymore. And as a photographer, I had to actually relearn to see, because a lot of the photography that I do, I like to shoot into the sun. I like to shoot things backlit. And as I did this, because I got an extra hole in my eye, I'd get lens flare, basically like you do with the iPhone.
Yeah.
And it flares all over the place, and you don't get a good picture. I mean, that's one of the limitations of an iPhone. It taught me to see things different in telling a story. After my eyes had healed up, I went for a test to test my peripheral vision, because when you get glaucoma, it slowly kills off your retina, and so you don't have as good a peripheral vision anymore. It turned out my peripheral vision in my left eye just doesn't even exist. But here's the weird bit. I have no idea of that. And I didn't know people with glaucoma had that problem. I remember seeing commercials as a kid, like, need to get your eyes checked for glaucoma because it gives you tunnel vision. And so I thought glaucoma would give you so you just saw straight ahead. But the reason people don't know they have glaucoma is because it turns out your brain is actually what's filling in all this stuff around you. So this was a really shocking fact to me. And I remember it on a plane one day. I was flying, and I remember this fly was on the plane, and it landed. I was in the bulkhead row, and it landed by the thing that said life jacket under seat. This fly is walking over the word life. And I realize, because I'm bored and sitting on a plane, I look and I go, I can only read the word life, and I can't read the other words. And it's just like, wow, is that my own personal limitation? I wonder if I can train my brain to see more, because it would be advantageous for me to be able to see more in my job. So I worked on this for ages without realizing that, in fact, we can only see about a thumbnail size of detail at arm's distance at any given time. And outside of that, we don't see detail. And outside of something about the size of the palm of our hand, we basically just have a sensor that looks for things that are flashing or moving quickly. And when we see something flash or move quickly, we will move our eyes over there. And so we dart our eyes around a room, or anytime we're presented with a new situation. And our brain, as it darts around, will kind of in real time fill in all the information and build a visual 3D set for you.
Yeah.
And it's the same part of your brain that does this so people who are blind, they also have an idea visually 3D, And it's because it's not their visuals that are doing it. There's a part of our brain that creates this 3D space around us, and we're just feeding it information all the time. So when I understood this completely changed the way I told stories, because suddenly now I understood that if you can only see a thumbnail size at any given time, even when I look at an iPhone, if I can only see a thumbnail size in the bottom right corner, I can't see the top left corner of my iPhone.
Right.
And I realized when we're talking about simplicity, I realized everything that I did was too busy. Because if I'm trying to tell a story, I need to move people's eyes to where I'm telling the story, or they're not going to see it. So if we need film editors, it's not like they learn this at school. I've been to film school. We did not learn that people can only see a thumbnail size. We learned that if you want somebody to look over there, you've got to give them some information to send their eye over there. Like, so we'll send an extra, like a person like walking through the frame. And we'll walk them through to the information that we want people to see. Or when there's a conversation going on, they will look at each other. And I realized that all these things that we do, they're because of our eye limitation, and that we can only see very, very little information. And so the goal is to move people's eyes to where you need to see them. And if you keep in mind that you can only see this tiny, tiny piece of information at any given time, especially when you're scrolling, then you completely understand the simplicity that needs to happen. One of the things that we can do to make things way simpler for people's eyes is to animate. So when you're talking about storytelling, videos are on a scroll are stronger than stills.
Yeah.
Because the video is moving, and it's going to send your eye to places. A still is very static.
Yeah.
And so we'll scroll, we'll look at a still, be amazed, and we'll scroll on. But on a still photo, if you've got a logo on there and some kind of visual story and a tagline, it's way too much information for a scrolling still. Like, the eye isn't going to move through all that information and get that. If you animate it on, so you've got your person telling a story, then we throw up some, it's not a good word, throw up. Then we place on the screen the tagline that we want to say, and then have a logo go on. As those things are all moving, the sensors, so our sensors for our peripheral vision, they see something appear, move.
And they'll move.
We move our eyeball to that place, and then we take in all the information. And I don't have data on this, but I strongly suspect when we have things like a commercial where we tell people about the commercial that we loved, but we have no idea what it's about, I strongly suspect a lot of the time they weren't purposeful in the way they moved our eye to that tagline at the end. So we were so busy watching the story, it became an ineffective commercial because we never saw their tagline. We don't recognize their logo because it didn't end up in our foveal vision. That's that tiny center, the size of our thumbnail. And so if we're really strategic about going, okay, simple, 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 we're going to do way better.
That is, I think that's exactly right, because when I've started to observe myself as I get addicted to my own phone, right? And I try to what are the things that I'm getting hooked on? It's the way of the flashy, simple. It's keeping me to move from one thing to another. I think, as you described, it's just, and they're not very great videos. They're just attention engineered very well. And is there rhythm that you do? Is there like a interesting shot for a split second or a millisecond or a second or whatever it is? Or do you kind of just like feel out when does it become boring? When is someone how do you get them to stop scroll?
You know what? I bet you there's an AI that's got data on that. I personally don't have data on that, but I've got experience on that I can speak to. And so if I am, I'm going to go take this a different direction than when I was about to speak. When it comes to camera motion and camera cuts, both are characters in a film. So we've got our lead actor, and then we've got somebody who's like playing a character role. They're playing a part for to help tell the story of the journey of our lead, if that makes
Sure.
sense.
Yeah.
The camera is one of those. The camera is as powerful as lines of dialogue. If the camera is moving, we will take from that there's chaos going on in our lead person's world. So if the camera is shooting low, we look at that person and go, oh, they are a hero. If the camera is shooting down on them, they're feeling very small. They're feeling insignificant. So we can tell roles by where the camera is placed. We can also tell roles by how things are cut. And I don't know whether, I suspect the cutting thing comes from our own visual experience. And so over time, this will change. The visual cues that we get from filming are probably from our actual life experience. And so they are going to vary from person to person. The cutting, still at this point, when you're cutting fast, it's high energy. I mean, that's obvious to say, but that can also be off brand, right? So here's where it gets difficult. It's that right brain, left brain thing kicking in. It's just like, okay, I want to engineer something that's going to keep people's attention. Quick cuts keeps people's attention. But if my brand is about, let's say something,
like a luxury vacation or something like.
Yeah, it's something where it's heart-centered. I feel, growing, rejuvenating. You don't want fast cuts. Fast cuts aren't going to tell that story. They're telling a different story. They're telling something frenetic. And so those two would be in opposition of one another. So even though you could maybe keep people's attention, you're off brand for your feeling. And the really important thing about telling a story is creating that feeling. So as an entrepreneur, probably the most important thing I believe that you can do, and this can be difficult, is to stay on brand. You have to know what the feeling is that your audience is going to experience when they have a win from your product or service. So at the end of your product or service, where you've taken them to, how they're going to feel, that's what you want to have in your storytelling. How you approach that is going, like the way you cut things, the way you film things, the way you color things, all of those are elements of the storytelling that you want to line up with that end feeling. And
Right.
so, yeah, like if you're talking luxury vacation, there's probably something relaxing about that, rejuvenating, growth, charging the batteries. It's not going to come from a bunch of flashes. You could have some flashes to grab some attention, the gratuitous sunshot, people not wearing enough clothing with their tanned skin, flash got my attention. Now I've got to go and develop my story. But like overall, it's just like, how can you tell, if you're trying to tell a spa experience,
yeah,
you're clearly not going to tell that with fast cuts. That, you're going to have this slow moving camera.
It almost reminds me of, so like one of the things I've instructed like some of my guys to try is to look at movie trailers, right? Because I think that's an industry that's pretty much mastered how to perfectly attention engineer and keep the same emotion. So you can see, like, even if it is supposed to be a film that's slower or not suspenseful or whatever, rom-com or whatever, they have enough like kind of interesting things that happen right away that pull you in, and then they set the mood, and then it builds to whatever level of climax they want, and there's some kind of clincher that makes you just, I gotta go to this movie. It's like almost like a system like that, and I'm like, that seems to be the best ads or something like that, where there's something that starts that gets me in, and then now it's set me into the mood. It's got enough time because it got my attention. Now I'm in the mood, and then it builds up a ton of anticipation to then need to do something.
Absolutely. If storytelling wise, I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're telling a 2-hour story or I got to say 30-second stories are hard to do. And it's a lost art because we're not limited to 30 seconds anymore.
Right.
So the number of brands that I work for that want a 3-minute video, and I'm just like, if we could do this in 90 seconds, it'll be stronger.
Yep.
We want to grab their attention. In order to tell a story, to get people to go through those 90 seconds, we have to leave some kind of story gap. We have to have a problem that has to be solved. We have to get attached to a person. So we want to feel something when we see this person, and they clearly have some kind of problem for which there's going to be an outcome that resolves in a good way. That's what's going to hold us to the end. If we just see a 90-second experience, it's really hard. I've seen some amazingly filmed 90-second experiences, and I'll watch them for the filming and go, wow, that is so beautiful. How many hours did that take to put together? And then it's that same idea of going back to audio, where it's just like, that's kind of like the really well recorded record. And if you get somebody to listen to a song on a cassette that's a better song, it's better.
Right. Yeah.
And if you story wise present that problem, and your character is not going to have satisfaction until the end of that problem. And the character, I mean, just off the top of my head, a visual that popped into my head was a faucet about to drip.
Yeah.
It's just like that. That's a story. As that
you're waiting
water
for something.
pools, you want to see that drop. Like when that lands and creates the ripples. So there's probably the world's simplest way of holding people through a story. You want to see that resolve. For some reason, we're wired to want to see that drip land in the pool of water and the ripples, and then it's over. If we can apply that same logic to our storytelling, where we are the drip in the faucet, we're going to get people through our story because they want to see it play out and have a resolve at the end. And I mean, that's a 3-second story, but I bet you can milk a drip for 20 seconds and hold people.
There's entire like YouTube accounts of things like that, just like those satisfying, like what's going to happen. We did one when we were renovating this building. We just did one when we were finishing off the floors. It was just a time lapse of somebody sanding the floors, and people just wanted to see what it was going to look like when it was done. And then they went and stained it. And it was just like, I don't know why it got so much engagement, but it was just something as stupid as that. They're just waiting to see what this thing looks like done.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we have entire channels dedicated to that. I mean, that is the story of house renovation.
Yeah,
we are going to hang like 22 minutes or like half an hour. I guess
see
sometimes
what this
an
stupid
hour,
house looks like when it's done.
We want to see what that looks like at the end. And it's just like, if they put that on at the beginning,
there's no point. You're right.
We're not going to watch the story anymore. The story's done. And it would be just the biggest disappointment. So we like to have that milked.
Yeah.
I don't know why we do, but
then I think that's honestly that could be the biggest gold nugget of this. I mean, there's been plenty, but that's one of the biggest gold nuggets of this whole conversation is how do you give enough of a taste to keep that attention throughout the whole thing and not give the juice until the very end of whatever you're doing to hold that attention through.
And you know what, that's the writer. And if you're an entrepreneur, you might be wearing all the hats and you might be the writer. But I believe you absolutely have to know that writing is the most important place, that beginning, middle, and end. And it's really about the beginning and end, because the middle will generally take care of itself.
Yep.
And a movie is just a bunch of those all strung together. Because as soon as we resolve a problem for a character, we have to present another problem for the character. Otherwise, everybody's bored with the movie. And there's this incredible balance in a movie between the point where we want to get attached to the character. We got to give enough time. So we're just like, we want to see this character do well, and presenting the problem. And it's always this tough balancing act of, have I presented enough information for me to be attached to that person, or have I presented it for too long? And depending on whether we're going to a movie, we'll accept it longer for a movie. But for instance, say YouTube, where they're going to 5 seconds to skip ad.
Right.
I'm going to say that I don't know for sure. I don't believe I have been involved in a successful one of those. I don't actually watch the stuff that I do. It always seems to go out like 6 weeks, 6 months, a year after I've worked on it. And so I rarely see the stats. But in that 5 seconds, if we don't get attached to a character, we're not going past the 5 seconds. And so you can, if you're not creating something to attach to something that needs to have an ending, people are just going to hit the skip button.
Yeah.
And I believe it's changed the way we consume that kind of video. And I have seen some that I've gone past this. I've not hit the skip button, and I'm just like, oh, that was really good. Well done, you guys.
Right.
I want to see this story. I'm going to watch it play out now. Most of the time, as we know, we hit the skip button.
Yeah, and that it's funny that you mentioned that, because there was a book, you've probably read it, but it was called Save the Cat. It was about screenwriting, and the theory of the title of the book, Save the Cat, is referred to as what the writer will do within the first 5 minutes of any movie. Is the character will, for the proverbial save the cat from the tree, to build a hero relationship with the audience. So there's some, if almost any movie now, if you like, after hearing that, you'll be able to point it out pretty quickly. There's something that the main character does within the first 5 minutes of the film that makes you like them. Because especially if they're kind of a rough, challenging character, or they have a very complex personality, there's something within the first 5 movies that makes you like them. They might be with their family, they might kiss their kids on the cheek and give them to school or whatever. There's some kind of save the cat scene that happens within it to do exactly what you're talking about. There's something that makes you need to build an immediate connection to the character, otherwise the rest of the movie falls apart.
Absolutely. And then I think perhaps one of the things that you could present, if you've got 5 seconds, is you've got to present that part that everybody can relate to. So I can relate to this person, and then you got to present the MacGuffin. MacGuffin, does that mean anything to you? The
No.
MacGuffin. Okay, so that's kind of the original kind of tension clincher idea, and it was this idea. The MacGuffin was the object that changes the narrative of the story. So, for instance, a MacGuffin shot could be, you could have two people sitting in a diner speaking to one another, nice light, it's all well lit, and the camera is slowly descending, and you're just seeing this conversation. And if you're going to hold for 5 seconds, it's just like, I'm not interested in this conversation until like 2 seconds in, the camera drops just below the table enough for you to see something that's flashing with a countdown timer on there, and you see it's dynamite. So suddenly the MacGuffin changed the conversation. And so we all know what it's like to sit in beautiful light in talking to a friend in a diner, but the MacGuffin has now upped the ante and tension a bunch, and we got to know how that's going to turn out. So I mean, that's like a random MacGuffin, but
But
the MacGuffin idea will work. You just got to present it in a way that's a little unexpected, and you got to draw their eye to that. A flashing timer, things like that. You got to move the eye fast.
Yeah, I think those are. I think this conversation, especially for people that are entrepreneurs, self-employed, or they're trying to figure out how to break through some of that noise on social media. I think this gave me. I think I'm already getting some ideas of like stuff we can do for just some quick ads, or some even Instagram content, Facebook, your stories on social media. Like there's just, now my mind's starting to run with how do we do this? How do we can maybe create some of these attention builders, or build some of this. So yeah, I think this is gold. This is
Awesome.
Certainly applicable to entrepreneurs for sure. And coming from someone that's like really, mastered this in large scale corporate settings, working with corporate clients all over the place, but also just being versed in many different styles of art and the genre of building something interesting. It's really a pleasure to be able to discuss this with you.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, bringing value to people when you do something you're passionate about, that's really cool. It's an awesome opportunity to be able to do that. Like would you like to hear about a failure?
Yeah, I might as well.
I worked.
We'll build the conflict at the end here to keep people to the very end.
Yes. I did a couple of big campaigns for Britney Spears. I was filming her lingerie campaigns. You probably don't know about these.
No, I'd like to. No,
see, there you go. You would think that everybody would. This, when it went out, was like it was like a record breaker for number of impressions on day one. And all the machinery was put into work on this. And the reason that I think there's an important story here is because it kind of encapsulates the stuff that we're talking about. And it's one of the mistakes that we can make with our own brands. The first thing is that we have to know how we want our audience to feel. And so this lingerie brand, big brand, who's going to pay really big dollars from Europe, they partnered with Britney, and we spent like a couple of days on filming. It turned out to actually be really quick. Just the prep for the filming, for the sets and everything that we were shooting in, took a tremendous amount of time. And then all the money in the world went into this machinery to get it out. And so it was on Good Morning America and Entertainment Tonight, all the places. And nobody knows that this is even a thing until you Google it. And it's just like, yeah, I shot that and I filmed that. That's me that did that right there. And the reason it didn't work was because right from the get-go, the brand, they thought because Britney was going to bring all the people, she was going to cut through the noise. They thought that was enough. I believe what they missed was the fact that if a woman is going to buy lingerie and wear lingerie, she wants to feel a certain way. I don't think Britney Spears brings that. I don't think anybody wants to feel like Britney Spears. Yeah. And so although this was shot, I'm going to say it was shot beautifully. It was beautiful filming. We had all the time, we had all the budget, but it didn't matter because it is about the feeling that people have to connect to. And so we have this idea that if we could just have more money or bring in more things and just have greater reach. And for me, it's just like, that is the ultimate example of let's worry less about the budget and less about the reach and more about how you want your audience to feel. And if you know how your audience wants to feel, you can tell a story that's going to resonate with them. And even if it's just, 50 people you're going to reach right off the bat, we can grow it from there. But all the money in the world and something that your audience doesn't resonate with and just scattershot with money, man, it's just not going to work for you. And that was why I like to share that error, because it's like you said, we are hit with so much media a day, 5,000 to 10,000 brand ads per day for the average person. How do you cut through that noise?
Right.
Consistency of story and resonating with your audience.
And that's something that you see that the people are trained to do in law school, and then that you're trained to argue when you're trying to do court cases. Is how do you get the jury to feel a certain emotion? How do you, in the same thing in advertising, and it all just revolves around the same idea of understanding the emotion you're trying to communicate. I'm a motivational speaker. I'm the whole time I'm trying to see how I can touch them in a way that makes their situation seem smaller than other situations, to where they can now overcome and say, let's do this, and it's about crafting that narrative and that story. I think that's why I do it naturally, but I think it's been why I've been able to successfully motivate audiences in a lot of different ways. And I think that anybody can apply that in whatever business they have. I always tell people, you're selling two things. You're selling results and you're selling an emotion, because the result is going to create some kind of emotion. So what is that emotion going to be, to your point, number one? And then how is your result going to get them that emotion? If you can get them to the emotion they want, you win and you sell whatever you want. Absolutely. And the emotion is the trigger for that checkout and buy button. And that's the world that I work in. Pretty much all my clients are buying online rather than in a store. Just kind of the way that my client list tends to sell stuff on the internet. Right. And if we don't have people connected to that story, even through to the checkout, and this is an area, especially for entrepreneurs, that I see a lot of, when we spend a lot of time on our social media, and then we spend all this money and time on our website, and then we send people to our checkout and we have this generic checkout. And it's just like, you know what? I know they don't allow for a lot of information on that checkout, but it's just like, man, make sure your colors are the same, your fonts are the same. Can you get some elements that are the same in that checkout? I like to think of it like you've got people that are out on a hike and they're following trail markers, and they've followed
this trail from your social media through now to your website, and you got all these feelings. They were feeling great on the start of their hike as they entered your social media. They got onto the website. They're now into the meat and potatoes. They're finding the information about it, and now they're going to the checkout. That's our rival when we want them to have great feelings.
Yeah.
Except there's no waterfall at the end of this hike.
Yes.
There's this like generic pay here, and it's just like, oh man. If you want to see the difference between, take a look at people's checkouts between the average entrepreneur who just goes, okay, I'm going to go with the generic, I don't know, Shopify or whoever's checkout, and go with a big brand who's creating an experience. They bring as much of that experience as they can into the checkout, because
I think that's
the feeling is where you're going to hit that. Where you're going to hit that button, and
yes,
wow, so many of us make that
and
mistake.
After the buttons hit too, validating the experience so that they don't feel buyer's remorse or anything like that, but like
yes.
keeping that emotion. I mean, that's a huge opportunity, I think, for entrepreneurs to keep that all the way through. We did the same thing with we actually researched a whole bunch of different companies for this one client we're bringing in. It's like a luxury boat company that they do like water taxis and cruises or whatever. So we wanted to keep that at the same thing, that keep that emotion. So we had to we found a company that just kind of, their conversion just sits right above the website in like a light box. And the conversion experience is like very fluid and beautiful. And it's in they charge like a 5% commission of every transaction, but I think it's totally worth it because you'll convert so many more people by keeping, like you're saying, that emotion all the way through. 100%
Absolutely.
agree.
Yeah. So we use the word experience a lot. And I often think, like, when you're looking at things, it's just like a checkout experience. What on earth, but for me, I've changed the word experience to mean spending time with. If somebody is taking any amount of time with your business, that is part of their experience. So if they've got to check out, if they've got to follow some path, if they've got to hit buttons,
it's a journey, right?
Yes. Anytime they're spending time, that's part of their experience. How can I make their experience better?
Right.
And for certain companies that I work with, we will look at the amount of time it takes to convert, not because we're trying to cut down their conversion time. We're just looking at the experience that's going on there. And if you've got something boring or it doesn't create a great feeling, you better take note of that, because there's a great, easy place to make a positive difference. So, imagery, storytelling, how can you bring it on brand from start to beginning for every moment that someone's spending a time experience with you?
Wonderful. Well, Alec, we're running up on time today.
Okay.
Can you give any of our entrepreneurs just one piece of parting wisdom that you think will help them in life and business anywhere?
Sure. Random one comes to mind. For me, I spend lots of time with craft. I work and work to raise the bar on my craft. When I moved to Nashville, in music, I ended up with a bunch of people who had all raised the bar in their craft. So what did I have left? I was fun to go to lunch with. And that sounds random, but I think if you can find that place, you got to be great at your craft, but at some point the competition is high. And if you're going to be the cream, people want to work with people that they really like, people who are delightful. And it's worth keeping in mind that we don't have to sell. Sometimes we just have to do things great and be completely delightful, and we will make clients for life that way.
Oh man, we could talk for hours on just that idea. So that's absolutely phenomenal. Alec, where can people find you if they want to follow on with your journey or learn more about what you do or work with you?
Sure, I would love to share. So I've got a company called yourvisualbrand.com. I just wrapped up my master's at Harvard and was filling in some gaps on my own personal learning to try and help people tell their brand story. So go visit there, and all my contact is on there. I am happy to help people out, because that is basically my next career, is just like, how can I leave a legacy of helping people?
Oh my gosh, this is extremely valuable. Alec, once again, thank you so much for jumping on the show. You guys are listening to Winners, Wallets, and Worldviews podcast. Winners featuring people crushing it in life. Wallets talking about small business, entrepreneurship, real estate, and Worldviews talking about business, philosophy, the arts, you name it. This is the show for you. Please like, share, subscribe, leave us a comment and a review, only if it's 5 stars, of course, because that's what helps this thing trend. So we appreciate it. Anybody that's looking to learn more about what we talked about, it's the art of storytelling, digital marketing, the visual arts, please share this with them. This would be very helpful for them as well as for us. So thank you so much. Go out there, be somebody.